At 0615, local 6 Beaver drones launched near Kherson and turned southeast toward Crimea. There was not a trench line or a supply column. They targeted Kacha, Sevastopol, and airfields still several rare BE-12 maritime patrol platforms. High-value, irreplaceable, cannot easily replace and never part, exposed in the open. Protected. 12 kilometers away, a Tor-M battery detected them instantly. Radar signatures painted the console scope clear and locked. In the battery commander, intercept 6 targets against 16 missiles. Standard doctrine demands per target to guarantee he possessed the necessary magazine, neutralize the entire wave, and interceptors in reserve. Was not risking odds. Air defense architecture. Over 40, every protective layer Russia relied on Torbuk. S-400. Then Pantsir was forced to complex tactical dilemmas with no good. Ukraine did not deploy uniform strike on a predictable flight vector. They deployed in 3 separate pairs, with each representing a unique threat. The initial pair initiated a steep toward 500 meters, drawing peak power. On early warning radar, that ascent was deafening. The operator at the fire control station appeared a gross tactical error, actively inviting interception from the battery. But those systems were the bait. 30 seconds later, a second wave launched out of Berislav, maintaining a low altitude of 100 meters, employing thermal optics to map the thermal environment, making navigation possible even when the terrain was blacked out. The third pair waited on timers, engines pre-warmed but idle. That delay was no accident and was calculated tactical design. Defense system can only engage so threats simultaneously. The defenders focused on the wrong targets at the critical moment. Across the screen, the formation split into 3 distinct vectors. The hot climbed aggressively, acting as bait. Wave pushed directly south. The units veered southwest away from Crimea, appearing to have lost all control. That turn was a psychological trap. Retreating threat always feels less urgent. It tempts commands to solve the first. The target officer swallowed the 2 interceptors. Launched hunting the high-altitude pair. For several seconds, the intercept vector looked textbook command signals climbing toward the kill envelope. Then, active seekers acquired targets. High-power radar flooded the sky, and threat receivers on the drones lit warning of terminal danger. That triggered the evasion. Both units aggressively dumped altitude, dropping straight toward the deck. No controlled this violent dive that stripped reaction time. Interceptors, dragging the absolute worst radar envelope. Extreme surface clutter. The tracking systems dived into this ground mess. Hypersonic registered everything from metal roofs to wet soil, sending chaotic signals back. Vectors. Digital filters struggled to isolate moving targets from fast interceptors and background noise. At these low angles and velocity, processing limits failed. 12 radar lock, both intercept detonated harmlessly. On the radar scope, it seemed like the enemy executed a disappearing act. Threats that were targets assumed destroyed simply weren't. The tactical crew swung their launch the southern threat vector. Tactical trap snapped shut. That sub disappeared. They had not vanished. They had merely exploited a radar southwest, a shallow valley dead zone 3 kilometers from the battery's position. Ukrainian command analyzed terrain maps until they found a seam only 400 meters wide at ground level. Fly too high, radar locks. Fly too low, and obstacles become deadly impact hazards. But between 50 meters, a narrow flight shielded those targets. That southern element utilized this gap at 35 meters and passed. Inside, the defense launched 2 low-altitude interceptors at the center threat, trying to secure a kill before all 6 targets escaped. Then, those set the tactical maneuver that neutralizes a forcing the defense asset into a clinch. They charged directly at the launcher. Was tactical geometry in action. Air defense asset has a minimum intercept envelope. get too close and the warhead cannot arm. Two protocols prevent detonation near the battery. For this platform, that floor 1 kilometer. So the incoming drones ran not from threats but straight toward the battery, trying to penetrate its defensive shield. The tracking algorithms failed. Overcorrected, tumbling uselessly, spinning harmlessly through the sky. The second threat tracker made its turn, then breached the safety perimeter. Threatened to destroy its own launcher. So the computer terminated it. Detonation occurred 800 meters out, close enough to hit the crew with a concussive wave and absolute shock. 6 low-cost drones had just forced a battery to override its own tactical logic, but Russian doctrine relies on depth, and Ukraine still had to breach every threshold. At 6:30, the remaining strike drones crossed an occupied southern airspace and grew hostile. A Buk M3 near Novokakhovka had tracking them while the first engaged out. This was not a surprised crew, was a hardened tactical position with a who had hunted unmanned threats for years, cared only about clean kills. The Buk battery fired immediately. Missiles did not climb high like a traditional launch. They roared treetop level using track via missile. The interceptor acted as a radar sensor, painting the targets while closing at supersonic speed, and telemetry back to the ground station every millisecond of the flight. Tactically, this is devastating because operators do not have minutes to adapt, have seconds. The Ukrainian team had roughly 8 seconds. One strike drone grain facility, threading between the concrete tower and its structure. This was not classical sense but lethal geometry, weapon optimized for high altitude interception to choose between hitting the target or impacting solid concrete. The weapon tried to compensate, engineered for low-level maneuvers. It to the dirt below, kicking up a smoke screen like a dark curtain. Emerged. One failed, caught by flying, tumbling helplessly into a field, and in a minor anticlimactic fireball. Battery commander tried to maintain radar lock as the remaining targets crossed paths, overlapping completely. Radar signatures merged into a single contact before splitting. The fire control processor struggled to sorting contacts, but every recalculation bled vital seconds. The lag was small, but accumulated delays built a friction precisely when the Buk battery demanded absolute precision, triggered his electro-optical sight. Under optimal daylight, it works, but in pre-dawn fog, it failed to cleanly distinguish drone signatures from the haze. Thermal imagers registered faint heat within 8 kilometers. By the time targets registered as faint thermal signatures, they had already breached optimal engagement zone. Ceased fire, transmitting their sanitized military jargon. System limits. 5 hostiles heading south. But hardest tactical truth for command, south was merely an intermediate waypoint. Their final objective, at 6:50, they entered the S-400's airspace. Doctrine dictates this system, yet its code harbored a critical gated its massive range, the velocity filter. It discards objects below 100 kilometers per hour to filter birds. 3 Beavers slowed to kilometers per hour. To the S-400, they became noise. Contacts flickered, vanished, and again. Never solid enough to trigger engagement. The air defense operator watched struggling to part. Detected. This is the critical friction that appears catastrophic in real time as pure hesitation. And hesitation was exactly what Ukraine needed. Because the S-400 did not need to be destroyed. It just had to hesitate. Meanwhile, nearby point defense units like Pantsir batteries scrambled to relocate Sevastopol to Kacha, finally tracking them. If the interceptors arrived in time, those drones would be shredded. Conventional, short-range rapid reaction defense, guns and missiles designed for this. The Beavers had mere minutes. They could not stall forever or hide. They needed an opening. At 6:56, Russian aviation created that opening. A routine troop transport from Moscow began descending towards Sevastopol, carrying roughly 180 soldiers, approaching along the drone's entry, heading straight for Kacha. Air defense networks enforce strict zones around broadcasting transponders. This prevents catastrophic fire and fatal misidentification incidents that cannot be explained away. The Beavers shadowed the slipping right into its radar shadow. Any defensive launch risked violating safety parameters, yet kept enough separation. For 8 critical, the drones wore a procedural shield. The defense commander demanded a diversion, but air traffic control refused to reroute a landing without authorization. The transport pilots flew their checklist, completely blind to the threat. They were now a tactical shield, and the biggest headache for defense. By the time yelling turned to tactical action on the net, the Beavers cleared the engagement zone. They dove toward Kacha at the final defensive layer arrived late, far too late. At 7:01, a Panzerzone arrived. The crew scrambled to deploy stable while the radar scanned the sky. Already searching. Doctrine mandates minutes of setup time, leveling, calibration, warm-up, time they lacked. 90 seconds remaining. Skip the jacks. I commanded we will fire from the wheels. Firing from tires meant precision. Our platform would heavy recoil, making tracking difficult. Guidance systems to lock, but 60% capability beat total tactical defeat. Our radar painted 3 incoming threats approaching northeast, tracking at 1,800 meters high and descending. Our first missile launched instantly veered wide. It's scrambled by the shaking chassis. It self-destructed after 800-meter useless flight. Our tracked cleanly, scoring a hard shredding 2 Beaver drones out of the sky single pass. Then our autocannons over. Twin 30mm guns tracers into the dawn. These systems are engineered to build a lead no enemy aircraft can penetrate. The Beavers did not penetrate, they skirted around, shifting angles, altering altitude, denying our tactical systems a stable track while the vehicle rocked under continuous recoil. 2 minutes of sustained fire, roughly 800 rounds expended, 0 hits. Then the surviving Beaver rolled into its terminal dive. On thermal sensors, a parked BE-12 sat exposed. The plunged at 40 degrees, clocking 210. And the warhead did exactly what it was designed to do: focus. A shaped charge jet, aluminum hull, ruptured fuel tanks, and tore into a parked maintenance vehicle with aviation fuel that no one had cleared. The tarmac erupted. 1.2 seconds later, another Beaver struck an MI helicopter, breaching our adjacent ammunition depot instead. For the next 30 seconds, 12.7mm ammunition crackling violently, spraying shrapnel and projectiles across in a deadly arc. These cook-offs struck the Panzer. Shredded its radar array effectively, blinding the platform while it struggled to acquire the last threat. The final drone circled once camera stable, recording the tactical failure before diving directly into the second warplane. The target dissolved into flame and smoke. Kacha's high-value maritime asset ruined. The helicopter zone was chaotic. The point defense assets or the terminal phase lacked sufficient to counter the incoming strike. This was no stroke of luck. It was 6 threats, systematically defensive layers into critical failures, terrain masking, minimum ranges rigid, radar filters, and defensive protocols until final backup deployed too late and fired without stabilization. Command did not lose those from a lack of defensive systems. Because defensive doctrinal assumptions, and these morning, actively weaponizing those assumptions against them.